So let's have a little chit chat here about this set and the gear. And this is of course now not organized. I go here just with the pictures. So when it's a little bit chaotic, please bear with me. So this was the garden, and I had this garden for 2 afternoons, and I had the option to ask, of course, that there are no changes and I can set up each time exactly everything in the same way. It was all playback based, so we had no problems with noise from the street or something else from wind or so. That was fantastic. But as I said before, musicians who are normally used to play live get a little bit focused when they have to listen to a little laptop, and that was maybe not the best idea, but we work on that, or at least I work on that. So this is the area where we had to film, and you can see here the light is not really harsh, it's very soft, and I go into that theme in a moment. But first let's have a look here to this. This was not so much for reflection, it was more to get the sun of my partner away, because she's here underneath of that umbrella. It was 100 Fahrenheit, straight sun, bang. And I can tell you, when you have to film 90 minutes or with building up the set, filming and building down the set, that cause some fluid exchange, to say it at least. So I had some gallons of water by hand and potassium and all of that stuff that you normally use for desert, but it was that hot. And so under this umbrella, and I have, I think, no picture of that, is a Sony X1. I thought maybe we get some detailed shots from the cello, but I didn't use it because I decided on the end I wanted to have here the whole production in 4K. It was just fun to see that quality from the camera, and it was my first production finally from A to Z with that camera, and the whole organizing of the footage goes here from this touchscreen, and all goes here to this little RAM disk or media. I have a couple of them and they fill rapidly, so 20 minutes, 64 gigabytes with no problem. So that goes really fast into the money. And then we have here a lens, and I have of course a case full of lenses, but I stuck here with this lens because these are still lenses, and at that time I had not a single cine lens. I collect at the moment at that stuff, but while we are shooting there, I had to shoot with still lenses, and still lenses have some problems, of course. They are produced to have a very fast autofocus. That means everything inside is pretty loose, so it can move very fast, and that shakes the stuff around. Not very comfortable when you want to make a movie, so autofocus is just not usable. Pulling the focus is also just barely possible because it has a very short turn here, so you can have your sharpness as a photographer very fast for one image, but to pull the focus when you move the camera, nearly impossible. So to shoot wide open was also not really an option. So why I use only one lens if I have even more and can work with it? This is the zoom lens, and the beauty of zoom lenses is normally that you can have wide to a little longer lens. This one here is 16 to 35 with the small sensor set to 4K. You have a factor in it, so it's just a nice lens for the average. And the beauty again of a zoom lens is you stick with one package of glass inside, and so you don't have any changes in color or contrast while you film. If you swap out the lenses with different brands, with different build years and so on, different concepts of the lens groups, then you will see the contrast, the color, pretty much everything might change, and that shows up when you edit this stuff. So my idea was here to stick with this lens, and of course the only change that it does here is to take everything from 16 to 35 millimeter in the way I needed it, and the best focus was here 5.6 to 11. From my point of view, that's the sweet spot of that lens, based on if you are more towards 16 or more towards 35. So there's not a single fixed sweet spot for that whole lens. It's always test your lens, test your gear. You need to know that. And I say that in imperative because I went to a long testing with all my gear and I found this lens is the best for this area here. And I was pretty happy with it. Of course, you don't shoot wide open. This camera here is rated 800 ASA. So with 5.6 or 11 even, you need neutral density filter, especially when you shoot here in the sun. And these neutral density filters should have an infrared or a hot mirror even in front of it. And I use here most of the time 1.2, 1.5, 1.8. And that means when you divide this by 0.3, that's always one stop down. So sometimes 6 stops or even more. Sometimes I have stuck them. I have a collection of these ND filters. It's a lifesaver because you don't want to change the time. And when you have a fixed aperture decided, then the only change is of course here with the ND filter. Okay, that is so far the gear stuff. And a little note to the Sony X1, I had a Key Pro Mini on it, so I got at least 4:2 out of it in HD. Normally this camera produces, when you don't record directly to a computer, only 4:20. And that's not really something I like to work with. It's barely the minimum that you should have. Okay, so here I set up the camera, and this little guy here, the hi-hat, is of course something that I wanted to have based on this head here. All of that went finally huge in weight, and it was close to the capacity of the tripod. I had to fix it with a rope to really make it stable, but it was very comfortable to work with this head here. It's fluid based and it has some springs in it. It's perfectly balanceable. Okay, so this was then all put on this chip arm here, because I thought when I have maybe a dolly here, I'm pretty fixated on one movement here. And when I have this just on a tripod, that will not work as well. So I had here this all on a chip arm, and the Red is not really a light camera. Even if it is small, then all of that here. So I had here, I think, 40 pounds on counterweight in it, and that really made this tripod, even a heavy one, to a more moderate weak one. I had to support this here with stones. Not really professional, I have to admit, but it's a low budget production, and whatever makes it happen has then, of course, the opportunity to be on the set. Here we had some air blowing to the musicians. I didn't want to have them sweaty. And let's talk about sun and light. You can see here that I used a long ladder, and here's some kind of broomsticks to have that fabric here. It's a natural tinted fabric, not just white. And this white, or this natural based fabric, gave a very nice warm tone, and with the fabric itself it also diffused the light a little bit. You can see here the shadow. It's not really contrasty and it's not black here, even with this camera here. Very nice. So the whole idea was, of course, that we filter the light from the top, but if we do so, we get maybe a lot of shadows under the nose and everything. So I had here these diffusers in the place, and sometimes I moved them around, or whatever was needed, they had to bounce the lights, and that was just enough to get everything nicely in balance. And the camera, based on the chip arm here, were able to be moved from the floor nearly to 6 foot high, and then of course one time around the whole construction here. Very comfortable to work with, so you only have to move and to make your stuff happen. Here you can see again the light situation, very do-it-yourself, but it worked. I think it's a nice light here, even with a point and shoot camera done. And here you can see even a little bit from the Sony X1. Okay, and you can see me a little bit in action. Here's the party going on, and here you can see how easily the camera goes up. And I had no handheld or shoulder camera for this event, because when it's 100° Fahrenheit, you don't want to run 90 minutes with a heavy camera on the shoulders. That was not really my ideal for that. So that was the whole thing, and 2 times 90 minutes, and I had to be done with it, which gave me, of course, some kind of problems, because I had barely material to shot. I had from everything a little bit coverage, some details, and of course Dale was, with one extra day, shot in the best way from some directions where I got all the moods in it, and some close-ups, of course. That's the whole thing finally. And of course, would I do it in the same way again? I guess so, but maybe I would have as well a little dolly just there where I can place the camera on, and maybe I would shoot a little bit more with a tripod as well, so I can move easier to extremer positions. And what I would do, especially here for the party, then I would have a shoulder rig just to have a little bit more subjective in it, or just my Steadicam. But when it's 100°, it's really heavy to move this stuff around. So I hope that gave you a little insight of the whole thing here. Looks very, very low budgie, but I hope it doesn't show up on the pictures finally. And the idea was, of course, to produce tutorials and mainly focused on Cinema 4D. Thanks for listening. See you in the next part.